Let's move from Iraq to Syria.
Yeah.
You've said you're confident there were no good options for the U.S. to be able to stop what's going on in Syria without getting our troops involved in a quagmire.
Right.
You've also recently said that you are haunted constantly by what's going on there, the nearly 500,000 killed,
Right.
The biggest refugee crisis since World War II. When you see images from Syria, do you ever doubt yourself? Do you ever second guess the decisions you've made?
I think any good president has to go back and re-examine the decisions that he or she made so that you can learn something from them. And there hasn't been probably a week that's gone by in which I haven't re-examined some of the underlying premises around how we're dealing with the situation in Syria and explored whether there are additional options that we haven't thought of. And that's not just an exercise I go through, that's an exercise we have our entire team go through. I'll sit in the Situation Room with my Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We'll bring in outside experts. I will bring in critics of my policy to find out, okay, you don't think this is the right way to go. You tell me what it is that you think would allow us to prevent the civil war that's taking place in Syria. And I will be honest with you that one of the things I think we have to be mindful of is we have, by a mile, the greatest military on earth. And we are going to always be in a position to defend the United States, defend our personnel, defend our people, our property, and our allies. But there are going to be some bad things that happen around the world, and we have to be judicious in thinking about, is this a situation in which inserting large numbers of U.S. troops will get us a better outcome, knowing the incredible sacrifices that will be involved. And in Syria, there is not a scenario in which, absent us deploying large numbers of troops, we can stop a civil war in which both sides are deeply dug in. There have been critics of mine that have suggested that, well, if early enough you had provided sufficient support to a moderate opposition, they might have been able to overthrow the murderous Assad regime. The problem with that is, as we've seen, that Assad regime is supported by Russia, it's supported by Iran. Because they have not threatened us directly, we would have been violating international law, as it's understood to just go in there and invade. And unless we were willing to sustain a large presence there and escalate if and when Russia or Iran got involved, then we were going to be in a situation where at some point the situation would collapse, except we would have a bunch of folks on the ground and be very much overextended. In addition, keep in mind that we still had a situation in Iraq in which we had to support a fragile government. We still had a situation in Afghanistan, which, despite the incredible sacrifices that we've made, we've given them an opportunity to succeed, but they're not out of the woods yet. We have spent well over $1 trillion. There is a long tail of costs in terms of us caring for those who come home with wounds seen and unseen. And so it's in these situations where you have to make judgments about what is best for the national security interests of the United States, even though what you see is heartbreaking. And that's one of the most difficult decisions that you make as president. But historically, if you look at what happens to great nations, more often than not, they end up having problems because they are overextended, don't have a clear sense of what is their core interests and what are things that they'd like to help. And the key in Syria at this point is, unless we can get the parties involved to recognize that they are just burning their country to the ground and get it on a diplomatic and political track, frankly, there's going to be a limit to what we can do. We will try to mitigate the pain and suffering that those folks are undergoing. This is part of the reason why our approach to refugees for example, has to be open-hearted, although also hard-headed to protect our homeland. But at the end of the day, there are going to be challenges around the world that happen that don't directly touch on our security, where we need to help lead, but just sending in more troops is not going to be the answer.